The antique clock in the hallway chimed 6 times. Its sonorous tones echoed through the emptiness of the Wright residence. Sophia stood before her bedroom mirror, methodically applying mascara while studying her reflection. At 34, she still turned heads. Her blonde hair fell in carefully styled waves. Her green eyes sparkled with a vitality that belied her inner restlessness. In her fitted black dress, she spoke of both success and careful cultivation of her image. She hadn't heard Sebastian leave for work that morning. These days, their schedules rarely aligned, a circumstance she'd orchestrated with deliberate precision. Her husband's absence had become a comfort rather than a void. Like finally being able to breathe after wearing a corset for too long, the buzz of her phone interrupted her morning routine. Lucas's name appeared on the screen, sending a familiar thrill through her body. Their digital exchanges had become a dance of desire and secrecy. Each message stepped closer to their next encounter. "Missing you," his text read. "Dinner tonight." Sophia's lips curved into a smile as she typed back. "Sebastian has a late meeting with clients. I'll be there at 7. She paused, finger hovering over the screen, then added, "With that blue shirt I like." His response came instantly. "Anything for you, beautiful." The exchange left her feeling light, almost giddy. Lucas had that effect on her, making her feel young, desirable, and alive in ways that her marriage hadn't in years. She returned to her makeup routine, this time paying extra attention to the subtle details that Lucas always noticed downstairs. She moved through their kitchen with practiced efficiency, brewing coffee she wouldn't drink, leaving dirty dishes in the sink to maintain the illusion of a normal morning routine. Sebastian's coffee mug sat unused in the dish rack, a silent reminder of their growing distance. When had they last shared breakfast? She couldn't remember, and the realization brought neither guilt nor regret. Her phone chimed again, but this time it was Sebastian. "Hope you have a good day. Love you." Sophia stared at the message with its painful predictability. Even his texts were boring, the same phrases, the same sentiments, as reliable and uninspiring as retirement plans or weather forecasts. She left it unanswered, slipping the phone into her purse as she headed for the garage. The day at her real estate office crawled by with excruciating slowness. Each client meeting felt like an exercise in patience. Each phone call an obstacle between her and evening. By 5 o'clock, she was practically vibrating with anticipation. "Heading out, Mrs. Wright?" her assistant, Claire, asked as Sophia gathered her things. "Yes, I have a dinner meeting." The lie came easily, practiced. "Could you make sure those Thompson contract revisions are on my desk first thing tomorrow?" "Already done." Claire smiled, efficient as always. "Have a good evening." The drive to Lucas's apartment complex took exactly 23 minutes in evening traffic. Sophia had timed it repeatedly, knowing precisely how to pace her arrival to avoid any nosy neighbors who might recognize her car. The familiar flutter of excitement built in her stomach as she pulled into the underground parking garage, choosing her usual spot behind a concrete pillar. Lucas answered his door wearing the requested blue shirt, its fabric stretching appealingly across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slightly damp from a recent shower, and his cologne, something expensive and masculine, filled her senses as he pulled her inside. "You're early," he murmured against her neck, hands already working at the zipper of her dress. "Couldn't wait." She breathed, fingers tangling in his hair as his lips found that sensitive spot below her ear. "Missed you." Their passion had an edge of desperation to it, as if each encounter might be their last. Clothes marked a trail from his entryway to the bedroom. Breadcrumbs of their desires scattered across his polished hardwood floors. Lucas's touch was demanding and possessive. Everything Sebastian's wasn't. Where her husband's careful lovemaking had become a tepid routine, Lucas set her skin on fire with each caress later, wrapped in his Egyptian cotton sheets. Sophia traced patterns on Lucas's chest while he played with her hair. These quiet moments after their passion began to mean as much to her as the physical intimacy. "You should leave him," Lucas said suddenly, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Sophia's hand stilled. "Lucas, I'm serious." He shifted his look at her, his hazel eyes intense. "This sneaking around, these stolen moments. Don't you want more? Don't you deserve more?" "It's not that simple." She sat up, drawing the sheet around herself like armor. "There's the house, our investments, 15 years of shared life, all of which can be divided by lawyers." Lucas followed her up, his frustration evident in the set of his jaw. "You don't love him, Sophia. You've loved him for years. If you ever did, you don't know that." His laugh held no humor. "You're here in my bed wearing lingerie you bought for me to take off. Everything about your marriage is a facade. And we both know it." Before she could respond, her phone chirped. Sebastian's name on the screen sent an unexpected chill down her spine. Coming home early, he thought. We could have dinner together. Your choice of restaurant. Damn, Sophia muttered, already sliding out of bed. He's coming home early. Lucas watched her with a mixture of amusement and irritation as she gathered her scattered clothes. The dutiful wife returns to her cage. Don't start. She shot him a warning look while shimmying into her dress. Not everyone can live as freely as you do. That's because not everyone is brave enough to claim what they want. He stood unashamedly naked and helped with her zipper. One day, Sophia, you'll have to choose between the life you pretend to want and the one you actually do. His words followed her down the elevator and into her car, echoing uncomfortably in her mind. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. She hadn't expected Sebastian home early. He never came home early. 15 years of marriage had taught her his patterns, made him predictable. This deviation sent warning signals through her mind, relief flooding through her when she pulled into their driveway and found it empty. Another text from Sebastian waited on her phone, stuck in traffic. Home in 30. The house was dark and quiet when she entered, exactly as she'd left it that morning. Sophia moved through the rooms quickly, turning on lights, creating the illusion of having been home for hours. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she climbed the stairs, headed for a quick shower to wash away the evidence of her afternoon. She was reaching for the bedroom light switch when a sound stopped her, the soft creak of leather from Sebastian's reading chair by the window. Her hand froze midair as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Sebastian sat perfectly still, his figure a darker shadow among shadows. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched her with an intensity she'd never felt from him before. Sophia, her voice sounded strange, too high, too breathless. You scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark? When he didn't respond immediately, she reached again for the light switch. His voice stopped her. Don't. One word spoken softly, but it froze her in place. Something in his tone, something she'd never heard before, raised goosebumps along her arms. Sebastian, what's going on? I thought you were stuck in traffic. Did you? Now he moved, reaching slowly for the lamp beside his chair. Light bloomed in the room, revealing his face. Calm, composed, utterly devoid of its usual warmth. His eyes moved from her face to her neck, where she suddenly remembered Lucas had left his mark. How long? The question came out measured, controlled, like a doctor inquiring about symptoms. Sophia's mind raced through possible responses, explanations, lies. But something in Sebastian's expression told her the time for lies had passed. How long? Each word carried the weight of steel, the precision of a surgeon's blade. Sophia, I can explain. I saw you. His interruption was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Today with him, in his bed, his eyes never left her face. So I'll ask one more time. How long have you been seeing Lucas? The world tilted beneath her feet. Sebastian had seen them, had followed her, had watched as she betrayed their marriage vows in the most intimate way possible. 6 months, she whispered, the truth falling from her lips before she could stop it. Sebastian nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known. He stood, smoothing his slacks with careful hands that she noticed didn't shake at all. Without looking at her again, he walked to the door. Where are you going? Panic edged into her voice. This wasn't how I'd expected you to react. Where is the anger, the hurt, the desperate pleading I'd anticipated? He paused in the doorway, his back straight and rigid. I need some air. His voice remained eerily calm, devoid of any emotion she could grasp onto. Sophia, wait, we should talk about this. I never meant to. He turned then, and something in his eyes made her step back. For just a moment, something dark and foreign flickered across his features, something that didn't belong on her mild-mannered husband's face. Then it was gone, replaced by that unsettling calm. There's nothing to talk about, Sophia. He used her nickname like a weapon, precise and cutting. You've made your choice. Now we both have to live with it. The front door opened and closed with a decisive click, leaving Sophia alone with the echoes of his words. She sank onto their bed, her legs unable to hold her any longer. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Sebastian was supposed to fight, to cry, to beg her to stay. His quiet acceptance felt wrong. Dangerous, somehow. The days that followed settled into an unsettling routine. Sebastian moved into the guest room without discussion. His clothes and personal items disappeared from their shared spaces, like he was slowly erasing himself from her life. They existed in the same house, but in different orbits, careful never to intersect when they did occasionally cross paths. Sebastian maintained that same eerie calm. He spoke only when necessary, his words polite, but empty of warmth. He came and went like a ghost, his presence in their home barely registering, except for the subtle signs of his passage. A coffee cup in the sink, the sound of the shower running at odd hours, the whisper of footsteps in the hallway late at night. Sophia told herself this was better than fighting. She told herself his passive acceptance proved what she'd always known, that he was too weak to stand up for himself, too spineless to demand what he deserved. The guilt that had initially plagued her faded like morning mist, burned away by Lucas's passionate embraces and Sebastian's apparent indifference. Life continued. She worked, met Lucas whenever possible, and ignored the growing distance between her and Sebastian. If sometimes she caught him watching her with that same strange, empty expression he'd worn the night he discovered her affair, she pushed the discomfort aside. If occasionally she woke in the night to find him standing in the hallway, staring at nothing, she told herself it was just his way of coping. Then came the morning that changed everything. The knock on her office door was sharp and authoritative. Two men entered without waiting for her response. One tall and broad-shouldered with graying temples, the other younger with watchful eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Wright. The older man spoke first. I'm Detective Christian Walker, and this is Officer Julian Morris. We need to ask you a few questions. Something in their expressions sent ice through her veins. What is this about? Detective Walker pulled out a small notebook. When was the last time you saw Lucas Matthews? The question hit her like a physical blow. What? Lucas Matthews. Officer Morris repeated, his tone carefully neutral. We understand you know him. Yes. We're friends. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she folded them on her desk. I saw him 3 days ago. Why? The detectives exchanged glances that made her stomach clench. Mr. Matthews' body was discovered this morning, Detective Walker said, watching her reaction closely. In a cabin outside the city. The world narrowed to a pinpoint of light. Body. The word felt foreign on her tongue. He was murdered, Mrs. Wright. Walker's eyes never left her face. Rather brutally, I'm afraid. The cabin where he was found is registered to your husband's family. Sophia's mind spun like a broken compass. Sebastian's family cabin, where they used to spend summers in the early years of their marriage, where Sebastian still went sometimes to think. That's impossible, she whispered. But even as she said it, memories began to surface. Sebastian's unnatural calm after discovering her affair, his late-night absences, the strange light in his eyes when he watched her. We need you to come with us, Officer Morris said, to identify the body and answer some questions. The drive to the cabin passed in a blur of pine trees and mounting dread. Sophia's thoughts raced between denial and dawning horror. Lucas couldn't be dead. And even if he was, Sebastian couldn't. He wouldn't. But as she stood in the cabin's bedroom, staring at the blood-stained sheets and the evidence markers scattered like yellow confetti, reality crashed over her like waves. The police spoke around her, describing what they'd found, but their words washed past her unheard. All she could see was the violence painted across the room. Violence that spoke of rage, of hatred, of a darkness she'd never suspected lurked beneath Sebastian's quiet exterior. "Mrs. Wright," Detective Walker's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you sure you want to see the body?" She nodded numbly. They led her to another room where a sheet-covered form lay on the floor. With clinical precision, they pulled back the sheet. Sophia's knees buckled. Lucas's face was almost unrecognizable, twisted in a final expression of terror and agony. The rest of him, she turned away, retching. "Take your time," Officer Morris said, his tone gentler now. "We know this is difficult." When she could speak again, Sophia forced herself to look at the detective. "You think my husband did this?" "We're exploring all possibilities," Walker replied carefully. "But we need to know where you were 3 nights ago." The question struck her like a slap. "You think Your fingerprints are all over the cabin, Mrs. Wright, including on items in this room." Walker pulled out his phone. "We also have text messages between you and the victim, quite explicit ones, and a witness placed your car near here the night of the murder." Sophia's world tilted again. Text messages. Her car. That was impossible. She hadn't been anywhere near the cabin when understanding dawned like ice water in her veins. Sebastian, who had accessed her phone while she slept. Sebastian, who knew her passcodes, who could have sent messages in her name. Sebastian, who had seemed so calm, so accepting of her betrayal. She looked back at Lucas's body, at the savage violence that had ended his life, and remembered the strange light she'd seen in her husband's eyes the night he discovered their affair. "Mrs. Wright," Officer Morris said, "I'm afraid you'll need to come with us to the station." As they led her to the police car, Sophia caught a glimpse of Sebastian standing in the driveway. He was talking to another officer, his expression concerned, helpful, perfectly normal. But when his eyes met hers for just a moment, she saw it again, the flash of something dark and satisfied. Then he turned away. Sophia understood with perfect clarity that her quiet, unassuming husband had orchestrated her nightmare with meticulous precision. He hadn't forgiven her betrayal. He'd been planning his revenge. The interrogation room surrounded Sophia with its harsh fluorescent lights and bare concrete walls, creating a stark contrast to the life of privilege she left behind. The metal chair beneath her felt cold through her wrinkled designer dress, the same one she wore when they brought her in 2 days ago. Detective Walker spread crime scene photos across the table with deliberate slowness, each image a fragment of the nightmare her life had become. The photos showed different angles of the cabin's interior, blood-spattered walls, overturned furniture, signs of a violent struggle that ended in Lucas's death. "Walk us through this again, Mrs. Wright," Walker said, his tone carrying that specific blend of authority and Fox sympathy she'd come to recognize. "Start with how you met Mr. Matthews." Detective Walker repeated, his weathered face illuminated harshly by the fluorescent lights. Sophia drew a shaky breath, her manicured nails digging into her palms. "We met at a real estate conference in March. His firm was handling commercial properties in the area." "And when did your relationship become intimate?" Officer Morris asked from his position by the door, his pen poised over a notepad. "I don't see how that's relevant to everything's relevant, Mrs. Wright." Walker interrupted, sliding another photo forward. This one showed Lucas's body twisted and broken on the cabin floor. "A man is dead. A man you were intimately involved with. So I'll ask again, when did your relationship cross that line?" Sophia stared at the photo, her stomach churning. "May, it started in May. And your husband knew about the affair. He found out a month ago." The memory of Sebastian's face that night sent a chill down her spine. "He came home early, caught us together. How did he react?" Morris's pen scratched against paper. He didn't. Sophia frowned, remembering. He just walked away. Didn't say a word. Walker exchanged a glance with Morris. That must have seemed strange. Most men would have reacted differently. Sebastian isn't most men. The words came out before she could stop them, carrying more truth than she'd realized. Tell us about the cabin, Mrs. Wright. Walker spread out more photos. Exterior shots of the rustic building nestled among pine trees. When was the last time you were there? I haven't been to the cabin in months. Not since she stopped realizing her mistake too late. Not since when? Not since last summer with Sebastian. Walker's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's interesting because we have witnesses who place your car on Lakeside Road. The only access to the cabin 3 nights ago, the night Lucas Matthews was murdered. That's impossible. I was home that night. Can anyone verify that? Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it. Sebastian had been at his charity event. She'd been alone. Or at least she thought she had been. Your fingerprints are all over the cabin, Mrs. Wright, including on the murder weapon. Walker produced another photo. A heavy brass fireplace poker, darkened with dried blood. Care to explain that? I used it before when we'd visit the cabin. For the fireplace. We also found traces of blood in your car trunk, Morris interjected. The lab confirms it matches Mr. Matthews. The room spun slightly. I want my lawyer. That's your right. Walker gathered the photos unhurriedly. But consider this. Right now, every piece of evidence points to you. Every single one. Maybe it's time to tell us what really happened that night. The holding cell they placed her in measured exactly 8 steps by 6. Sophia counted them repeatedly during her first night, trying to focus on anything except the images of Lucas's broken body. The thin mattress crackled with every movement, stuffed with material that felt like dried corn husks. A steel toilet sat behind a half wall that offered more suggestion than reality of privacy. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by nightmares of blood and betrayal. In each dream, Sebastian watched from the shadows, his face carrying that same eerie calm she'd seen the night he discovered her affair. Morning brought her court-appointed attorney. Marcus Harrison looked fresh from law school, his eager expression at odds with the gravity of her situation. He spread files across the visitation room table, organizing them with nervous energy. They have a strong circumstantial case. He began adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The forensics team found significant evidence linking you to the crime scene. I didn't kill him. Sophia leaned forward, her voice urgent. Someone is setting me up. Someone. Harrison's pen tapped against the table. You mean your husband? He's not what people think. The way he reacted when he found out about Lucas, it wasn't normal. According to witness statements, Mr. Wright appeared devastated but controlled. Several colleagues mentioned he threw himself into work, attended counseling. It was an act. Sophia ran her hands through her tangled hair. Everything about Sebastian is calculated. Always has been. Harrison studied her with a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Mrs. Wright, Sophia, I need you to understand something. Your husband has an alibi that's practically bulletproof. The Anderson Foundation Charity Gala had over 200 guests, including the mayor and half the city council. There are photos, videos, sworn statements from dozens of people who interacted with him throughout the night. Of course there are. Sophia laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Sebastian never leaves anything to chance. Never. Memories surfaced unbidden. Moments she dismissed over the years that now took on darker significance. Sebastian documenting everything in his little notebooks, recording conversations word for word. His habit of studying people, noting their patterns and routines. The way he could recall exact details from events years past. Tell me about your marriage, Harrison prompted, pulling out a fresh legal pad. Sophia stared at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore. We met in college. He was different, quiet, but intense. He noticed everything, remembered everything. I used to joke that he had a computer for a brain. And when did things change? They did not really. I changed. She swallowed hard. I got bored. Sebastian was so predictable. Always the same routines, the same careful planning until the night he caught me with Lucas. He just stood there, watching us, then walked away without a word. She met Harrison's eyes. Who does that? Who catches their spouse in bed with another and just walks away? Someone in shock, perhaps. No, Sophia shook her head. You don't understand. Sebastian doesn't do anything without purpose. That calm, it wasn't shock. It was something else. Harrison made a note, his expression thoughtful. The prosecution will argue that your affair gave you motive. That when Lucas threatened to end things, you snapped. Lucas never threatened anything. He wanted me to leave Sebastian to start over with him. Can anyone verify these conversations? Sophia stopped, realizing their conversations had always been private. Their meetings carefully scheduled to avoid witnesses. Even their text messages, which she now suspected Sebastian had somehow altered, wouldn't show Lucas's desire for a deeper commitment. Days blurred together in a haze of legal meetings and sleepless nights. Each piece of evidence Harrison uncovered seemed designed to tighten the noose around her neck. The prosecution built their case methodically. Each detail fell into place with a precision that felt hauntingly familiar. Sebastian visited on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after her arrest. He entered the visitation room wearing one of his expensive suits, looking every bit the successful businessman and grieving husband. Sophie, he spoke her nickname softly, his face a perfect mask of concern. How are you holding up? Don't. She wrapped her arms around herself, creating a barrier between them. Don't pretend you care. I'm still your wife. He sat across from her, his movements measured and precise. Despite everything. Despite what, Sebastian? Despite finding out about Lucas, or despite framing me for his murder? Something flickered in his eyes, the same darkness she glimpsed the night he discovered her affair. But his voice remained gentle, concerned. You're under tremendous stress. The evidence, the investigation, it's natural to look for someone to blame. The evidence. Sophia leaned forward, studying his face. Like the blood in my car, the text messages I never sent, the witnesses who conveniently saw my car at the cabin. Sophia, you planned this, didn't you? All of it. You probably started the night you caught us together. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening of his spine, a slight tilting of his head. For a moment, he reminded her of a predator assessing its prey. That's quite an accusation, he said, his voice carrying a new note, something cold and satisfied. Especially from someone in your position. Why? The question burst from her. If you wanted revenge, why not just divorce me? Divorce. Now Sebastian smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. That would have been too easy, wouldn't it? You'd have walked away with half of everything we built together, free to continue your life with your lover. A guard appeared at the door. Time's up. Sebastian stood, smoothing his jacket with familiar precision. Try to stay positive, Sophie. These things have a way of working themselves out. The preliminary hearing arrived with brutal swiftness. Sophia sat beside Harrison in the courtroom, wearing clothes Sebastian sent from home, a subtle reminder of his control. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically, building their case piece by careful piece. The state will prove, the prosecutor announced, that Mrs. Wright engaged in a months-long affair with the victim, Lucas Matthews. That when Mr. Matthews threatened to end the relationship, she lured him to her husband's family cabin and murdered him in a crime of passion. Sebastian testified as a character witness, his performance flawless. He described their marriage, his discovery of her affair, his attempts to reconcile. His voice broke at just the right moments, his pain seemingly genuine. I blame myself, he told the court, eyes downcast. If I'd been a better husband, maybe she wouldn't have strayed. I was willing to forgive her to work things out. I never imagined she would. He left the sentence unfinished, letting the implication hang in the air. Sophia watched from the defendant's table, seeing for the first time how masterfully he had crafted his image. The devoted husband, wounded but loyal, standing by his wife despite her betrayal. As the evidence mounted over weeks, each new revelation seemed designed to destroy any chance of reasonable doubt. Her fingerprints on the murder weapon, blood traces in her car, witnesses who placed her near the cabin on the night of the murder. Harrison worked tirelessly, but each attempt to build her defense met a wall of carefully constructed evidence. Even her past worked against her. Credit card receipts showing purchases of lingerie never worn for Sebastian, hotel meetings with Lucas, the gradual withdrawal of money from their joint accounts. They were building a narrative. Harrison explained during one of their meetings, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, having an affair with a younger man. When he threatened to end things, she snapped. But that's not what happened. The evidence suggests otherwise. Your fingerprints, your car, your phone records. Sebastian set this up. He's patient, methodical. He would have planned every detail. Harrison sighed, rubbing his temples. Your husband was at a charity event with hundreds of witnesses. He has photos, videos, timestamps, social media posts. There's no way he could have. That's exactly what he wanted everyone to think. Sophia's laugh held an edge of desperation. Don't you see the perfect alibi, the overwhelming evidence against me? It's all too neat, too precise. The trial itself became a blur of testimony and evidence. The prosecution built their case methodically, presenting a picture of a calculating woman who murdered her lover in a crime of passion. Sebastian's testimony provided the final stroke, his performance so convincing that even Sophia almost believed him when the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent. Sophia stood on shaking legs, Harrison's supportive hand on her arm. On the charge of first-degree murder, the jury foreman read, "We find the defendant guilty." The words echoed through the courtroom like physical blows. As the judge read her sentence, life in prison, Sophia caught Sebastian's eye across the room. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the truth behind his calm demeanor. Not weakness, not acceptance, triumph. She understood now, too late, how completely he had orchestrated her destruction. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every subtle detail had been carefully arranged to ensure her conviction. The quiet man she dismissed as weak and uninteresting had planned and executed the perfect revenge. As they led her away, Sophia realized that Sebastian's true nature had been there all along, hidden behind his mild-mannered facade. She had mistaken his patience for passivity, his attention to detail for obsession, his careful planning for weakness. How wrong she had been. The harsh fluorescent lights of the women's correctional facility cast sickly shadows across the concrete walls. Sophia lay on her narrow bunk, counting the spiderweb of cracks in the ceiling, a habit she developed in the 3 weeks since her sentencing. The orange jumpsuit felt like sandpaper against her skin, a constant reminder of her new reality. The daily rhythm of prison life played out in metallic clangs and echoing footsteps. A guard's keys jingled, followed by the heavy thud of the door opening and closing. Somewhere down the block, a woman sobbed quietly. Officer Martinez stood at her cell door, her expression unreadable. "You've got a visitor." Sophia frowned. Her court-appointed attorney, Harrison, wasn't due until next week. Her family had stopped visiting after the conviction. Their absence spoke volumes about Sebastian's influence, how carefully he'd shaped public opinion against her. "Who is it?" Martinez shrugged. "Your husband." The word hit like a physical blow. Sophia's hands began to tremble as she stood, smoothing the coarse fabric of her jumpsuit in a futile attempt at dignity. The walk to the visitation room felt like a march to execution. Each step echoed off the institutional walls, mixing with the pounding of her heart. Other inmates watched her pass, their eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "The notorious husband killer," they whispered. "The cheating wife who murdered her lover." But if they only knew the truth. Sebastian waited in the visitation room, a study in calculated perfection. His charcoal suit looked freshly pressed, his posture relaxed yet commanding as he sat at the metal table. The fluorescent lights caught the silver threading through his dark hair, a distinguished touch that Sophia had once found attractive. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting, his eyes taking in her prison-issue attire. "Orange really isn't your color." Sophia sank into the chair across from him, conscious of the security cameras tracking their every move. "What do you want, Sebastian?" she asked, direct as always. He placed a manila envelope on the table between them. "I brought you something. Consider it an early Christmas present." The envelope felt heavy in her hands. Inside, she found divorce papers, the legal language stark and unforgiving. Her fingers traced over Sebastian's signature, already in place at the bottom. "Irreconcilable differences," she read aloud, her voice bitter. "Is that what we're calling premeditated murder these days?" Sebastian's lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Now, Sophie, we both know how dangerous false accusations can be. Just look where they've landed you. Why now?" She gestured at the papers. "Why not wait until my appeals?" "Appeals?" He laughed softly. "Do you really think you'll win an appeal? The evidence against you is overwhelming. Every judge who reviews your case will find the same thing. Proof of your guilt written in fingerprints, DNA, and witness statements. Evidence you planted." Allegedly, Sebastian leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? No one would ever believe that quiet, methodical Sebastian Wright could orchestrate something like this. The grieving husband, standing by his unfaithful wife, even after she murdered her lover. It's the perfect cover story." "You're enjoying this," Sophia realized, studying his face. "You've been enjoying it since the beginning." "Of course I have." His expression hardened. "Do you know what it was like watching you throw away 15 years of marriage? Seeing you sneak around with Lucas, thinking I was too stupid to notice. So you killed him." "I executed him." Sebastian's correction came sharp and precise. "There's a difference, and I made sure he understood why before the end." Sophia's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "I wanted him to know that his death would destroy you. That everything, the evidence, the witnesses, the perfectly crafted trail leading to your conviction, was designed to make you suffer." His eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. "You know, I promised to leave town to never see you again, but it was never about me." "Tell me, Sophia," she demanded, her voice raw. "Tell me exactly what you did. You owe me that much." Sebastian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Why not? It's not like anyone would believe you anyway." He settled back in his chair, as comfortable as if he were giving a business presentation. "First, I needed to establish your connection to the cabin. That was easy. We'd spent so much time there over the years. Your fingerprints were already everywhere. The trick was making it look like you'd been there recently with Lucas. The witness who saw my car paid off, of course. Though technically, they did see your car that night. I just happened to be the one driving it." His smile widened slightly. "Amazing what you can do with a good wig and some careful timing. The text messages, child's play. You never did change your password, Sophie. Even after I caught you with him, I spent weeks crafting those messages, building a digital trail of your supposed plans to meet at the cabin. The police's tech team verified they came from your phone, your normal locations. Perfect digital breadcrumbs." Sophia's hands clenched into fists. "And the charity gala? Your alibi? My masterpiece." Pride crept into Sebastian's voice. 200 witnesses, including the mayor and half the city council. Photos, videos, social media posts, all carefully orchestrated to prove I couldn't possibly have been at the cabin. I made sure to speak with every important guest, appear in countless pictures. The mayor even mentioned me in his speech. A generous donation has a way of making people remember you fondly. While you were really dealing with Lucas, Sebastian's expression darkened. "Oh, I was at the gala. Just not for the entire evening. It's amazing how many people will swear they saw you somewhere. If you make enough appearances early in the night and again at the end, the human mind fills in the gaps. assumes you were there the whole time. And between those appearances, I paid Lucas a visit. Sebastian's voice turned clinical and detached. He was surprised to see me at first, thought I wanted to talk to work things out like civilized men. He actually apologized, if you can believe it. So he never meant for things to go so far. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to block out the images his words conjured. Stop. But you wanted to know, Sebastian pressed on. You wanted to hear exactly what happened. How I made him understand that his death would be your destruction. How each piece of evidence I planted would ensure you spent the rest of your life in prison. Why not just kill me instead? Because death would be too quick, too merciful. His voice carried genuine emotion for the first time. I wanted you to live, Sophie, to wake up every morning in this cell, knowing that your choices led you here, to watch as the world forgets you as your youth fades, as everything you valued slips away. A guard approached their table. 5 minutes. Sebastian nodded, then turned back to Sophia, signing the papers. Let's make this official. And if I refuse, then I'll wait. His smile returned, cold and satisfied. I have all the time in the world. After all, you're not going anywhere. Someone will figure it out, Sophia said, hating the desperation in her voice. Eventually, someone will see through your act. My act. Sebastian stood, straightening his tie. You mean my role as the devoted husband, standing by you despite your infidelity, supporting you through the trial. He shook his head. I played that part perfectly. Everyone sees exactly what I want them to see. The wounded spouse trying to do the right thing, the perfect performance. Sophia spat. Is that what matters to you? Fooling everyone. What matters is justice. Sebastian's voice hardened. You made me watch as you destroyed our marriage. As you flaunted your affair. As you treated 15 years together like they meant nothing. Now I get to watch you lose everything. Your freedom, your dignity, your future. He gathered his briefcase, then paused. You know what the best part is? The truth is right there in plain sight. A quiet husband's revenge orchestrated down to the smallest detail. But nobody will ever believe it because nobody ever really saw me. They saw what I wanted them to see, just like you did. You won't get away with this forever. I already have. Sebastian's expression softened into something almost pitying. You made me feel like I was nothing, Sophie. Now you get to be nothing. Just another inmate. Another casualty of your own bad choices. That's what everyone will remember. Not the woman you were, but the murder you're believed to be. He turned to leave, then looked back one final time. Enjoy your new life, Sophie. I hear the next few decades can feel very long in here. The guard led Sophia back to her cell. She sat on her bunk, the divorce papers clutched in her trembling hands. Through the small window, she could see a patch of sky, the same sky she'd once taken for granted. Evening fell, bringing with it the hollow sounds of prison life winding down. In her mind, she could see Sebastian dragging home to their house, sleeping in their bed, living the life she'd thrown away. While she remained here, trapped not just by physical bars, but by the web of evidence he'd so carefully woven, she thought about the quiet man she'd married, the one she'd dismissed as boring and weak. How wrong she'd been. Behind that mild-mannered facade had lurked something dark and patient, something capable of planning and executing the perfect crime. The reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. Sebastian had orchestrated the perfect revenge, not just taking Lucas from her, but destroying her entire life. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every subtle detail had been carefully arranged to ensure she'd never see freedom again. Night deepened, bringing no peace. Somewhere down the cell block, a woman began singing softly an old blues song about loss and redemption. Sophia lay on her narrow bed, the divorce papers signed beside her, letting the mournful melody wash over her. She closed her eyes, remembering the man she'd married, or thought she'd married. The quiet, methodical Sebastian, who documented everything, who noticed every detail, who planned each move with chess-like precision. She'd mistaken his careful nature for weakness, his attention to detail for obsession. Now she understood those very qualities had allowed him to craft the perfect revenge, a punishment far more cruel than death. He'd taken everything from her, her freedom, her reputation, her future, and he'd done it so completely, so precisely, that she would never be able to prove the truth outside the prison walls. Sebastian moved on with his life, appearing to the world as a victim who had finally freed himself from a toxic marriage. The true depths of his darkness remained hidden, leaving only Sophia to grapple with the knowledge of what really happened, a truth that would die with her behind these walls. She ended the darkness of her cell. Sophia finally understood the full scope of Sebastian's revenge. He hadn't just wanted her to suffer, he'd wanted her to live with that suffering. To wake each morning knowing she would spend the rest of her life paying for her betrayal. The quiet man she'd underestimated had orchestrated her complete destruction. And now she would spend decades living with the consequences of her fatal mistake. Not the affair itself, but believing that Sebastian's calm demeanor meant he was weak. She hadn't recognized the patient, calculating predator beneath his mild-mannered facade until it was far too late. The sound of the evening guard check echoed through the cell block. Sophia looked at the divorce papers one last time, then slowly, deliberately began to sign her name. Each letter felt like another nail in the coffin of her former life. Sebastian had won, not just her imprisonment, but the complete destruction of everything she'd been. Her reputation, her freedom, her future, all gone, orchestrated by the man she'd foolishly thought she knew. Life continued. Sebastian would go home, sleep soundly, wake to his freedom, while she remained here, trapped in the cage he'd so carefully constructed, living the nightmare he designed especially for her, the perfect revenge, served cold and calculated by a man everyone believed incapable of such darkness. In the end, that was Sebastian's true masterpiece, not just destroying her life, but doing it so completely that no one would ever believe the truth. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.